Mark Latham, welcome into the weeds. I really appreciate you coming over to the Legalised Cannabis head office. Thanks very much.
Plenty of heads, plenty of jungle. I'm very impressed.
Yes, mate, we've got a bit of an indoor grow here that's being very productive. But speaking of heads, you've got one. You're a bit of a mean head. You've been described like by so many people in so many different ways over the years, but like, are you a bit of a bully, mate?
Well, who have I bullied?
I don't know. I mean, there's a famous confrontation between you and the Prime Minister at the 2GB offices there. That looked like it was a pretty intense moment there. It was a pretty pivotal moment.
It was ABC. It was the last day of the election campaign, so I didn't think it made much difference to anything, really. But, you know, the media latch on to one symbol of the person who lost the election. It was just a handshake between two men. But earlier, I wrote this up in the Latham Diaries, earlier we were at a function on grand final day at the St George Leagues Club, and Howard crushed the hand of my wife Janine, and she said, you know, give it back to that little bloke, so I did.
It was a square up.
A square up.
Well,
square up. But people wouldn't believe that Howard had done that to her, and I was written up as monstering him. But, you know, at the end of the day, if I wanted to rip his head off, I could have, and all I did was shake his hand.
So you can take the boy out of Liverpool, but you can't take the Liverpool out of the boy.
Yeah, that'd be right.
You grew up in Liverpool, South
Green Valley, yeah.
Green Valley. Tell us a little about your background. You know, you're a proud Westie. You like wear it as a badge of honour.
Yeah.
Where did you grow up?
My family was always from the inner city. And up to school age, we were living next door to the Alexandria Public School in Sutter Road, Alexandria, just behind Mitchell Road. And the government wanted to expand the school, so they took our home and said, you can either go to Seven Hills or Green Valley. And Mum said, well, Green Valley's got the sewer on, so we better go there rather than Seven Hills. I could have been the mayor of Blacktown and member for Chifley or something. But we ended up in Green Valley, which was a totally new public housing estate known as Dodge City on the front page of the Sun newspaper. Pretty rough. There was a resettling period, I suppose. Tough inner city guys at the pub, the Green Valley Hotel, where I worked through university years. But, you know, I remember a childhood of, a mother in particular who was dedicated to my best interest, saying education was the way forward. I remember I used to come home from school. She said, I don't know what's in those books other than you've got to do them. So she was very strong in impressing the importance of education, which has been successful through our family, particularly when you look at her grandchildren who were powering ahead. So, yeah, it was the Australian story of not owning the home, didn't own a car, pretty basic, but a big emphasis on school education, getting ahead, first one in the family to go to university.
What did your folks do?
My mum was a school cleaner. She cleaned at Marsden Road Public for probably 20 years, cleaned the classroom of Michael Clarke, for example, the future Australian cricket captain. And my dad worked at the Redfern Mail Exchange, which was a great piece of industrial archaeology. You know, I worked there one university holiday and nobody really knew who was doing what job. So it was typical public sector back in the 70s and 80s.
So you're growing up in the 60s out in Liverpool?
Yeah, from school age on, went to Ashcroft Primary School and then qualified in the selective test to go to Hurlston at Glenfield, which was a great school and for me a really lucky break.
Still is. Still one of the best
schools
in Australia.
But, you know, it was very special for me. I was Dux of the school in 1978 and then on to university. So that message from my mother about education sort of propelled me forward.
And why politics? Why did you look to politics? Were you a political family?
No. I would have been the first one in the family to join a political party, actually. Mum and Dad would have been Labor voters, but, you know, just out of tradition, family tradition.
They weren't unionists?
Working class, no, not active. First one who would have gone to a political meeting of any description, I think. Dad had a bit of an interest in politics around election time. Mum, not so much. My grandmother, on my mother's side, was a great fan of Jack Lang, had a Lang bust on her mantelpiece back in Alexandria and Mitchell Road, and probably said to me very often, there'll never be a greater Labor man than Jack Lang, who did so much for us during the Depression, which he did, particularly on the welfare front. So there was a Labor tradition, but no activism, none whatsoever. Why me? I suppose at age 14 or 15 at school, because there was sort of politics among the students at school and a few of the teachers, political debates, Labor versus Liberal. There was that sort of awakening. But I sort of had a sense of urban injustice. The Green Valley didn't have much. You visited other parts of Sydney, they had a lot. You know, what's this imbalance in society? What can you do about it? And I suppose I've been trying to do something about it ever since.
And was it local politics that propelled you into? Were you looking at things like the Vietnam War or at these types of global? You weren't really interested in that. You were pretty local, parochial.
Yeah.
You know, worried about self-interest and your own community.
Where's the great, well-built, designed and provided for library in Green Valley? We didn't have much. Where are our deluxe sporting facilities that
swimming
the North
pool.
Shore could take for granted? Yeah, swimming pool.
Back in the day,
things.
people don't realise that back in the day, just getting the sewer on, like Gough Whitlam, you know, he rode to power pretty much on, you know, promising sewer in southern Sydney, didn't he?
That's why we were in Green Valley. You'd have the sewer. Seven Hills, which was the other public housing option, didn't have the sewer. So Mum didn't fancy the outhouse. I suppose none of us would have. And we landed there because it had all the Whitlam agenda, and he was just up the hill there at Cabramatta, and the local member for Werriwa, was very relevant. Urban provision, just basics, a good library, swimming pools, sporting fields, good schools, the opportunity to go to university. I was lucky in that regard. Probably if the university fees had been in place, we couldn't have afforded it. I would have had to go to the workforce. So Whitlam abolishing university fees gave me, as with so many others, the chance to be the first in the family to get higher education. So yeah, that Whitlam agenda, that was us. That was his electorate, and that was us.
And so you go to university, are you studying economics? And like, you're smarter than you look, you did pretty well.
Oh yeah, got an honours degree. But you know, it was the time at Sydney University, the clash between the traditional economics and the political economy, and I was sort of in the middle of that, and in the end did more politics in my fourth year, and did an honours thesis on the Whitlam government. Had a chance to interview Gough, the great man himself, retired as Prime Minister and from the Parliament. So this is about 1982. And at that time, how did it come about? Billy McMahon got out of Lowe. He was in the office next door on the 19th floor of the Westfield Towers. He retired from Lowe, and Malcolm Fraser gave him a research assistant entitlement. Well, if he gave it to Billy, he had to give it to all the former living Prime Ministers. So Gough had this new position, and a dream for a university student just finishing up. I get to go work as a researcher to Gough Whitlam.
Wow, what luck. And how
Amazing.
Amazing. And that's, been fundamental, changed your life. So you're working for former Prime Minister Gough Whitlam, you're researching for him, and you turn your attention to, like, a seat. You get involved in local politics.
Yeah, well, I suppose, I've always had this attention to localism and local government service. You can scoff at it, but in an area like Liverpool, it makes a big difference. I think if you're on the council in Mossman or Vaucluse or Wallara or somewhere, all the provision. I used to say, look, in our area, so many families rely on public provision. They haven't got a library at home full of books that they purchased by private means. They can't afford the private schools. They haven't got an in-ground swimming pool. They're relying on public provision. So that was the big emphasis I had. I was 7 years on Liverpool Council, very political, very intense. Labor had problems getting control of the council, even though it had been a very traditional Labor area, federal and state, very strong. But in 91, I was elected as mayor, first Labor mayor for quite some time, with a Labor majority on the council. And
so that was a real bear pit for you. You learnt politics there. You played rough and ready?
Well, the other side, I was saying to one of our colleagues, Chris Rath, the other day, we're talking about the scene out in Werriwa now, which is going to be a contested seat for the next federal election, and how intense the local government fight was. We're talking about Ned Manoon, the mayor out there now. And I said, probably the worst thing I've heard in politics, and it was directed at me, was they had a Liberal councillor, Gary Lucas, who was a real hater and fighter. Didn't like me, I didn't like him. And he stood up in open council one night in front of the local press and the gallery and said, I feel sorry for Mrs. Latham. Mrs. Latham had the great tragedy in her life of having twins, but she killed the wrong one. Now, mate, you can say I've said some right things in politics, but not on that scale. So your instinct naturally is to jump up and job him and deck him. but somehow I kept control. and it was probably so bad, I was so stunned that you could have someone at a council meeting, an elected person, saying that my wife had killed my twin sibling, basically, and that's why I was there. So that was his best insult, and it's sort of off the scale, isn't it? Off the radar.
Yeah, now, but back then, I suppose politics was like that. People did hate. It was incredibly tribal, and there wasn't, I suppose, the scrutiny on politicians that there were. They could get away with saying things like that. They weren't recorded for everything they said and did.
Yeah,
and,
before social media, in the social media era, that would have really blown up big time, but it was just a local skirmish. It was vicious, but, you know, the Liberal Party there, they played hardball. They put a private detective on me. There was a bloke following me around the Liverpool CBD at one time, and I busted him. Yeah, I just kept noticing this one bloke was following me.
What were you up to? What
I wasn't up to anything. I was going about some shopping and meeting some people. I think the council had a meeting room down there. I had some meetings scheduled as mayor, but this guy was following me around, and a few of the Liberals said, yeah, that's what we did for a while. I don't know, they wouldn't have got much, but not as much as they'd get on you. So, you know, it was intense. It was you say a bear pit, yeah, intense, and probably a grounding in the ferocious tactics of combat politics.
But you learnt to hate. You famously wrote that you were a bit of a hater, a political hater, that you hated some of the elements that you were coming up against. I think you described it, the narrowness of the Liberal agenda and their failure to address the real needs of people.
I think that grounding in Liverpool politics probably gave me that feeling about the Liberals. I was probably thinking of Gary Lucas and what he said about me and the viciousness of the battles that we had. But, you know, my main thing was hating urban injustice and the inequality, lack of opportunity. You know, I got into the state Parliament, tried to put a big focus on education opportunities. Nothing worse than a failing school for disadvantaged kids in a disadvantaged area. That's the great blockage to getting ahead. You know, if I'd had a bad schooling and parents who didn't care about education, I certainly wouldn't have, you know, made anything of my life.
So you got the schooling, you get the break with Gough, you're the mayor of Liverpool, a few years there, and then the chance comes to run for Werriwa. Mm-hmm. You take that. When are you elected to federal parliament? 1994,
so age 33, you know, which is young enough.
So that was the last. That was Keating's
last
second
2 years of the Keating government.
Keating government.
Yeah, Keating had said that if we'd won in '96, he would have made me a minister. He was had a policy of promoting young people, Michael Lavash, Michael Lee, and others. But we got hammered in '96. You know, I had to work really hard to make sure Werriwa was safe because we lost seats like Lindsay. So it was the Howard landslide that swept us out, and you know, the rest of my time there was in opposition.
So you're in opposition under Beazley. Mm-hmm. You're there. Were you a shadow?
Yeah, from '96 onwards, I was shadow minister for assistant treasury, I think, and then education, up to the '98 election, where I had a bit of a internal blow up with them. Didn't like what they did to my education policy, so some years on the backbench. You know, Beazley, I suppose, very different personality to me, not my cup of tea. That happens in politics. So,
but yeah. you were coming up with ideas. You were writing books. You were civilising global democracy. I think one. Yeah. That's the real page turner. That one.
Wait for the movie.
And writing education policy for your sins and getting rebuffed.
Yep.
But you made a name for yourself. And how did you emerge as a contender for the leadership? We went from Beazley to Crean.
Yep.
And then you were, again, you know, like...
well, I was shadow treasurer under Crean, and we were polling terribly. I remember Eric Rosendale came out. He was the general secretary, and he showed me some polling. We're going to lose Werriwa. So Simon Crean wasn't travelling all that well, and they said, we'll be down to 25 seats. So Simon Crean got tapped, and it was a contest between me and Beazley, and I won that in December 2003 by just 2 votes.
And so you were, at that point, you were the rising star, and you were coming up against John Howard, who was a wily politician. What was your take on John?
Well, some people on his own side detested him. You know, the public Howard was different to the private one. You know, someone like Chris Pine would say, that rotten, miserable bastard behind the scenes. So that's the nature of politics. I always thought public and private, people had it the wrong way round. Keating, same thing. And Howard, I think his main asset was obviously experience and, as you say, wily and conniving. I mean, he won the 2001 election off the back of the Tampa controversy.
The children overboard and Peter Reith.
Yeah, and in 2004 I was doing quite well for a while. I think made a mistake on two fronts, probably didn't focus enough on economic policy and do some things to preempt and close down their scare campaign on interest rates. The coalition broke through with an advertising campaign to say interest rates would be higher under Labor. It was just a scare campaign. It wasn't based on any particular facts or anything I'd said about the economy. The reality was, I suppose, the economy was very strong. Howard was a tougher opponent. I often look back, or sometimes look back, and think it would have been a lot easier to run against Malcolm Turnbull or
Costello.
Well, no, he was more formidable. I think the quality of leadership in Canberra's dropped a fair bit, but I think Turnbull's obviously an easier opponent. Probably Scott Morrison too, compared to John Howard. And the economy at that time was so strong. The government's budget's in surplus, interest rates were low, the economy was strong. One of the key indicators, and Albanese will find this out, is when the pollster asked, do you think the country's headed in the right direction? 70% of people were saying at that time, yes, it is. It's very hard from opposition to win when 70% of the public are saying the country's going in the right direction. So that's
the old maxim, oppositions don't win, governments get voted out.
Yeah, generally. So people vote the government out when they think the country's gone the wrong way, and I think that's what Albanese's facing at the moment.
And so you become leader of the opposition. And what were your big agenda items back then? I mean, you were speaking out about. Were you speaking out on the Iraq War at that point?
Yeah. I said Iraq was a mistake, and Australia should get its troops out of there as quickly as possible. Howard seized on that and said that I was cut and run policy, but
risk the US alliance and all that.
Well, in hindsight, it was certainly the right stance, wasn't it? The Iraq thing. It was at a time where we were finding out there were no weapons of mass destruction. It was a war conducted under false pretences. It had degenerated into a sectarian civil war between the various Islamic factions in Iraq, and it was going to be a shit show for many, many years. So what was Australia's responsibility with this, given it was primarily a venture of George W. Bush and Tony Blair? So my attitude was, look, we're on the other side of the world. We've got defence priorities in our region. We should withdraw our resources and set up a defence of Australia first and foremost. So that was a big issue. We campaigned on saving Medicare. I campaigned on early education issues. We had tax cut in the election campaign.
Climate change was turning up as an issue then, wasn't it?
It was.
God, come on,
it
you
was
can
very
say
slow.
it. You can say it.
Well, very early days. Very early day. I remember a speech my staff drafted for me about climate change. I was pretty sceptical about whether I needed to talk much about this, but it did. It featured in the 07 election with Rudd and Howard, but in 04, I don't think it would have been mentioned in the formal election campaign.
No, it really was the millennium drought there that sort of put it on the agenda.
Yeah, and the big study in Britain, wasn't there? Wasn't there some decisive report that the Blair government produced in Britain?
That's exactly right. And
I forget the name of the author of the report, but it got a lot of international attention. The UN picked up the issue. It really got busy in 2006 more than the time I was
Al
there.
Gore took his
Inconvenient
show
Truth,
Inconvenient Truth,
so
took it on the road.
It gathered pace a couple of years after I'd left the Parliament.
So you miss out against Howard. You leave the Parliament and you become famous. You're a pretty prolific writer. Mm-hmm. You just don't stop writing and saying things. Sometimes you're to your own detriment, I've got to say, mate. Much condemned. But you become a wasp on the wall for the Labor Party, famously saying that. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a wasp on? You're a polemicist. You're writing essays for the AFR. You're writing books. You're releasing your diaries, the rest, which are pretty no holds barred.
They were, but
what does it mean to be a wasp on the wall?
Well, initially when Rudd was popular, I used to say to people, people I've known a long while, they're crossing the street to avoid me. Because I was critical of Rudd as a personality and predicted that the sub-factions of the Labor Party would turn on him and turn on each other, that Labor had degenerated into a series of self-serving sub-factions. And I suppose the diaries were a bit of a predictor of the chaos of the Rudd-Gillard years. And at that point, when people saw the real Kevin Rudd, they started to embrace me on the street instead of going to the other side. So I suppose.
So you'd have some tips for Trump? He's probably trying to elbow Kevin out the door as we speak, isn't he? I mean, Kevin's on. He's on limited time, don't you reckon?
Well,
as ambassador?
I don't think in trying to get Trump to give Australia a tariff exemption, it's very helpful. Our ambassador once described him as a traitor to the West and the craziest man to ever occupy the White House. Now, Trump's no fool. He knows the insults that are thrown at him, so it's not very helpful to have Kevin there.
I once moved a motion in the Legislative Council that described that and was passed that called him a revolting slug.
Oh yeah, I got that revoked.
Did you?
Yeah.
You.
Sorry.
You bastard.
Sorry. Is that your motion?
That's my motion.
Someone told me it was a crazy green.
It was.
Who moved it? Who was it? Ross Cameron or someone said?
I moved it. Did you get that revoked when I was
did.
out?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
you bugger.
I did. Sorry. Well, it's ridiculous.
Oh, it's true though. He's a bit of a grub.
Well, I don't know about that. Look, there's allegations against all of us, but Trump. They said Ross Cameron said, that upper house has got a motion on its books insulting the American president. So when I got there, I moved a motion to revoke it, and it was carried.
Was it?
Yeah. It was
You've undone.
It was carried easily. I think
was it?
I don't even Shoebridge backed you. No, it was your motion. They dudded you, mate. They dudded you at every
I
level.
once passed a motion accidentally calling Eddie Maguire a buffhead because I wrote this motion about Collingwood and then I forgot that I turned the page over and clause D was and Eddie Maguire's a buffhead.
But you're a Collingwood supporter.
I know, but he was leading us off a cliff. We hadn't had a premiership for 12 years it was more. It was like nearly 20 years, and so I was very disappointed. So Kevin Rudd, though, you're talking about what was wrong with Kev? You butted heads. You were like, was he a bit of a micromanager, megalomaniac?
Micromanager, megalomaniac, and
I remember that
the most amazing networker you've ever seen. If anyone had a caucus vote for him, a union official, or Rupert Murdoch could do something for them, he'd be network. He was non-stop on the phone, leaking, conniving. Terrible human being.
You've never done that.
Well, not as much as him. But
not as well.
It was just a terrible human being, Kevin Rudd. But you heard that when the Labor Party turfed him out, the character references he got from Wayne Swan and Tony Burke and co were a lot worse than anything they ever said about me. And I'd be giving them a bagging. And Rudd also sabotaged their 2010 election campaign. So I don't think I need my analysis of Kevin Rudd was pretty accurate.
I remember that Paul Howes did him in, didn't he? AWU.
Yeah.
There was what was it
Bill
called?
Shorten.
Bill Shorten. What was it called? The ABC show late at night. What was it called?
Late Line.
Late Line. That was a good show. That one they used to drop at 10 o'clock at night. Yeah. Howes goes on.
Yeah, I used to get on there a bit. Yeah,
AWU.
Tony Jones.
That was in the ABC. Had some pretty good journos and it was 7:30 and State Line and Late Line were pretty good shows, and that was where it all played out. And then we've just really had chaos in terms of our prime ministers since then, haven't we?
Well, there's a bit more stability, but I think Albanese's running to be the first elected Prime Minister to get re-elected since Howard.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
That just shows you.
Like, could I just say the life expectancy is about, it's about 24 months before you're either knifed or you lose an election.
Yeah, I think the punters are about to kick out Albo, actually.
You think it's on?
Well, in the outer suburbs, geez. I mean, the main problem is living standards. He spent an extra $170 billion. Living standards have gone back by 10%. Even in the Whitlam recession, the Fraser recession, the Keating recession, living standards dropped just a little bit, 1 or 2% maybe.
But we're not in recession.
No, we're not. But I'm just saying that's how bad the living standards decline is. It's the only thing keeping us out of a technical recession is the immigration numbers. So, people are feeling this cost of living pain in the outer suburbs. And, I think my old seat of Werriwa might be lost by Labor. And if that happens, Albanese's out on his arse.
Well, we'll get to the election. I want to talk about that later on. But we're talking about your journey because you went and you wrote for you were a darling of the Fairfax press for a while there, writing for the AFR and mates with Peter Fitzsimons. And
I wouldn't go. Oh yeah, for a little while. He reckons we played rugby against each other, and I dished it up to him. But I also had a column in the Daily Telegraph. They were the days. But the main thing, it wasn't just the sub-factions and the thing about Rudd. The thing where I ideologically drifted away from the Labor Party was their embrace of identity politics. My thing about urban injustice opportunity was always based on, opportunity and equality, justice are based on socio-economic factors. But when they started to get into race, gender and sexuality as the main drivers of social justice, I just thought that was fundamentally wrong, and I suppose that's where we parted ways.
Yeah, but there's a contradiction there because back in the day, like I think you, and this is before you were in One Nation and you were, you'd sort of shacked up with Pauline, you were saying she was a cut through, you didn't shack up, unless you did shack up, unless you want to tell us, tell all. No shacking up?
No, mate.
Oh, okay. You said she was a cut-through politician. You said, look, this is a politician who's communicating effectively, and she was doing it on race, wasn't she? That's identity politics. That's not really talking, unless I suppose immigration is in a way.
Well, I think her issue was favouritism on the basis of race, that everyone should be treated equally. She never articulated things all that well, but I think her core philosophy was that people should be treated equally regardless of their race, gender or sexuality. It used to be a thing for the left to look through skin colour and gender and sexuality, ignore those things.
We're all equal.
To pay attention to them was actually bigotry. And now, of course, diversity, employment, all the woke programs and so forth, you can't get away from it. It's everywhere.
Where do you think it came from? Where do you think it, there's been a lot of fingers pointed at academia, that, there was Marxist infiltration of our tertiary institutions and bureaucracy. Do you think it's a conspiracy that grand? Or is it just a drift in the conversation?
One of the things I never liked about One Nation, people like Malcolm Roberts, who thinks there's a conspiracy theory orchestrated by the UN, that every morning the UN sends out a memo as to what we've all got to do. And I said, Malcolm, mate, I was the leader of the Labor Party and a senior frontbencher for quite some time. And if there was a UN conspiracy, I never got the memo. No one ever from the UN ever told me what I was supposed to do. So I don't believe in any of that. I think there was a spontaneous recognition by the left that with the fall of the Berlin Wall, economic Marxism had fallen over. And it was a clever strategy for them, no doubt about it, and it's still relevant today. It was better to try and infiltrate and work through institutions, and identity politics was ripe for that approach. So I think that's where it came from, in part. I think the other thing was that, one of the great puzzles of modern politics has always been, why did the corporate sector go woke? Alan Joyce and big company leaders and all that. And I think part of that was that they worked out through identity politics they could achieve two things. They could show that they were sympathetic to social justice causes and they weren't necessarily greedy capitalist pigs. And the second thing was that they could generate their own injustices, even though they were filthy rich. That's the thing about downgrading socio-economic status. How does someone like Alan Joyce say on sexuality he's disadvantaged? When obviously, he's on $20 million a year or whatever. So,
and then he's, screwing over baggage handlers and outsourcing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So
outsourcing.
The identity politics for him
and
screened the greedy capitalist pig exploitation side of his business, and also gave him an argument to say, I'm as disadvantaged as the person growing up in Green Valley. So I fundamentally resent that because I just think it's bullshit.
So you came back. There was a while where you were with the Liberal Democrats.
Yeah,
that didn't last so long. Why the Liberal Democrats? Because there's not really, they don't have a lot of momentum here in Australia.
No, well,
but the
the
libertarian movement. You look at Argentina and parts of Europe. It's getting a bit of a head of steam. Yeah. So you saw that as a bit of a vehicle. You still had a bit of political fire in you.
I was interested in minor party politics because I was been in a major party, but I had a period where I wasn't doing politics other than these newspaper articles. I was the primary carer of my children at home, which was a great period. But I was interested in minor party politics. I went to some of their meetings, took out a membership ticket. I didn't think it was a lifetime commitment to them. And, there was some issues about David Leinhelm, who was sort of a pretty strange dude at one level and didn't have a lot of political strategy about him. So I was interested in running for the 2019 election here in the Upper House. And David Leinhelm offered me number 2 on his ticket. And I said, well, I'm not doing that, mate. That's just ridiculous. And in the end, I ran for One Nation, and he missed out altogether. So
you are aware the Libertarians are big supporters of legalising cannabis.
Yeah. I suppose the thing about them was I thought
freedom and
it was
personal
just
choice.
cannabis, but heavier drugs too. I thought their drugs policy, their guns policy, and their immigration policy would be electorally, handicap them. And you heard John Ruddock in our house today walking away from their traditional pro-immigration approach, immigration freedom across national boundaries. So, yeah, I thought...
I think they're abolish borders, aren't they? They're just, freedom of movement.
Yeah, and pay your way in.
Really?
The people, unlimited people can come to Australia, is their policy, in an auction. If you've got the most money to come to Australia and you pay the government, you're in.
Well, that's actually how it works. If you actually have a look at significant investment visas, if you've got $15 million and you're wherever you are in the world, you can get to the front of the queue. We have these visas in us. People don't realise that. We have a lot of refuge. Well, we don't have a lot. We have a lot of people emigrating here as, joining up with their families and refugees and the rest. But we have a big chunk of people from all over the world, India and China and wherever, see Australia as a bit of a bolt hole and they can buy their way in.
Yeah, well, it's not libertarian policy anymore because John Ruddock has said he wants a 5-year pause on immigration numbers. So, and I think the gun policy of theirs, everyone, freedom to have a gun and be like the United States.
What's your attitude to guns? Because you were in Parliament during Port Arthur.
I was. I remember it vividly.
And like we'd had a couple. There'd been a big shooting out at Parramatta, hadn't there? There was a massacre out there.
We won in a Strathfield shopping
centre.
During the Unsworth government, about 87.
87.
So yeah, there had been. We did, and I think the gun laws after Port Arthur have been effective in stopping that, keeping Australians safe. I suppose we've seen a rise in knife crime, but we haven't had the massacres since, public massacres since. Touch wood. So my attitude is the Australian way is not to be gun-toting, gun freedom like the United States. And I think every time we see a school massacre in the United States in particular, it sends a shiver down the back of parents.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, so it's never going to fly in Australia.
Okay, so you, but in terms of the Libertarians, I've got to touch on this because I was doing my research. Mm-hmm. You got caught, and because the Libertarians were big, they are big supporters of a plebiscite for the legalisation of cannabis, and it's been a long vexed issue. It's been 50 years people have been discussing as public policy. But you got caught in Canberra in a corridor there at the end of a line having a spliff, didn't you, mate? When you were a young MP.
Yeah, I wrote that up in my book, so I confess to that.
And how'd you go? Did you like it?
Okay. Well, I mean, from Green Valley, I wasn't a cannabis virgin, was I?
Weren't you?
Well, I've grown up in Western Sydney, mate. I mean, this is just part of the rite of passage.
Part of the rite of passage.
I look not a
heavy, stole it as a kid.
Not a heavy regular user. I was a girlfriend who was into it more than me. So irregular user, but not snobbish about it or whatever. But and there were people, mates of mine who were regular users. It was sort of
no big deal.
No big deal.
There you go, Albo. See there, show some ticker.
Albo would have the same experience as me from the inner city.
He would. I reckon Albo was knocking off a few Nilex hoses and going for the orchie occasionally. A few bucket bongs.
That's right.
But he won't fess up. So you end up running for One Nation. Pauline Hanson, you must have dipped your toe in there with a bit of trepidation because people don't last long in One Nation, do they? No. I think the life expectancy of a One Nation MP is about 6 hours, isn't it? They get elected. It's just like they get elected, and the first press release is they're gone. Tanya Mahalik.
Oh yeah,
she's resigned. Well, she's announced she's resigned today.
I was lucky to have a good, solid, fantastic, and a mate of mine as the running mate, Rod Roberts. So the two of us in Parliament for those 4 years.
Did you know each other before Parliament?
No. But we had a mutual friend. I remember ringing him up and saying, "Oh, I got this bloke that could be the running mate, Rod Roberts." Oh yeah, Rod, he's one of us. He's like us. He's a regular bloke. So that was good enough for me. and that recommendation was spot on. So I had Rod there, and I suppose our approach was One Nation had no presence in New South Wales except us. And we had a bit of a standoff deal with Pauline. Let us just do New South Wales and you do Queensland. And in the first 4 years we were here, she didn't ring up once to say, oh, you're wrong on that policy issue, do something else. People were saying, I expect Pauline rings you every second day telling you what to do. False. Did not happen. But the one issue that came up was misuse of the New South Wales electoral funding that they funneled into Queensland, which was plainly wrong. They're going to funnel into West Australia and for the national campaign. And I had to call them out on that and threaten to call in the coppers. So we got our money back, but it soured the relationship. And as soon as she had a chance to have a go at me, she did. And obviously Rod and I walked away. So I think our attitude was, the financial irregularities aside, was that she broke the deal of, leave us alone in New South Wales, you just do Queensland.
You got elected in 2019. I got turfed out then. You came, but 2022, you had a head of steam up. One Nation were polling pretty well. You stood down. To run again. Yeah. A bit of a cunning plan, that one. And you were getting just a shitload of press. You were in the press every day. You were out there really picking a fight on the trans issue. You were picking on some trans kids, weren't you?
Picking on trans kids. I mean, look at what Trump's done in the United States and protection of women in sport. There's a lot of left-wing feminists who argue this case about trans, that men shouldn't be allowed in female spaces, toilets, change rooms, sporting fields, and that was my approach. But we did a very useful parliamentary inquiry through the Education Committee to say the trans issue is complex. Certainly maybe 15-20% of these kids are genuine when they change over, and that'll be for life. But the others, peer group pressure, faddism, some mental health issues come into play. So, that we've got the experts in there. And I suppose we reach conclusions similar to the Cass report in the UK, that really, given the uncertainty of whether the young person will stay of that gender, it's better to wait till they're 18. And I always said publicly, and still say, if adults want to change their gender every other day, they should. Do I care about that? No, that's their business. But children, it's a bit different. And the Cass report, and now what Trump's done in the United States, I think verifies that.
Do you think it's fair him saying trans people can't be, serve in the military?
Well,
why couldn't they serve their country?
Well, I think they have. Well, he wrote the executive order on the basis they've lied about their gender. That a man saying he's a woman is not the standard of honesty they want in the American military. But there's a lot of military reports. There's mixed evidence about this, but a lot of military reports saying it's not great for combat arrangements and morale.
They said that about women, though.
Well,
they said they didn't want women in frontline positions.
Yeah, well, how many have they got?
Well, if there's a big blue, ask the Russians. They threw whoever. Didn't matter, what you had in your trousers.
They're not great, going great in the Ukraine, are they? So, I'm not a military person, a military background. Trump's done that, and I don't think there's any big problem with it.
But the trans issue really blew up. Like, there was a few fights out in you clearly saw woke politics as a vulnerability. Like, you've got to admit that. You saw it as a vulnerability.
Against
you
sure.
Yeah, you
What's wrong with that?
Well, it's up to you to you choose what you want to campaign on. But you for a guy who's got all this a background in education policy and public policy and economics, it was a wedge, wasn't it?
No, not a wedge. I mean, these are practical issues. I had complaints from parents, and what do you do as an MP? You've got to respond to them. Parents who'd say, the school encouraged my son to become a girl. They'd give him a girl's uniform to dress in, take it off him, and he'd come home. And and one mother around Coffs Harbour said she only found out that the boy was a girl at school talking to another parent in the shopping aisle of the supermarket. And the parent came out and said, "Oh, that's interesting. What's happened to Brendan? Brendan's now Brenda." What are you talking about? Oh, your son is a girl at school. And the mother had no knowledge of that whatsoever. And this was a caring family that knew the boy had some issues and troubles, and they had him in counselling and the like, medical experts trying to help him. So I don't think that's right. I think the school doing that is fundamentally wrong. The most important carer of a child is the parent, and they've got the right to know if the school's doing something like that. So my issue was about parental rights, the right of a parent to know what the school is doing with transgender, and the issues we raised about women in sport, girls and women in sport, and whether or not it was wise to have transition and puberty blockers and the like for minors, for under 18s, and the report I brought down and with the committee said that it wasn't, and I think subsequent medical evidence has verified that position. But we were also responding to what the experts were saying. I didn't really see it as a wedge. I felt terribly sorry for the parents who contacted me, very often crying down the phone about these circumstances, which were breaking up families. The grandparents, for instance, in that example I just cited, were paying the private school fees. They stopped doing that on the basis of what the school did. So it's very fragmenting for the families if it's not handled with sensitivity.
Speaking of handling things with sensitivity, you are known to be prolific and pretty, how would I say, concise on Twitter. And you got into a bit of trouble, or if I can describe it like that. So now you're in Parliament as independent. The honeymoon is over with Pauline. In actual fact, everyone's abandoned ship.
Yeah.
You and Rod Roberts and now Tanya Mahalik are all independents.
Yeah. Bob Catter said to me, he did a calculation, or his office did, that she's had 31 MPs over the years who started with her, who didn't finish that parliamentary term with her. So is the problem us or her?
Yeah.
31.
31 out of how many? Probably.
Well, out of 40 or...
Out of 33.
Well, basically out of 33.
I
At 31 and counting, let's put it that way. 31 and counting. And since then, Tanya Mahalik, so at 32 and counting. So, I think there's an issue there that I reached the conclusion, even though she's kind of well motivated and means well at some level, she can't deal with the idea of a party growing and her not having direct control over the things that matter to her. So if a party grows from a small party to a larger party, you're going to have differences of opinions, conflict, debates, and sometimes people just saying, no, Pauline, you're fundamentally wrong. But she's not very good at handling that.
No, her way or the highway.
Yeah.
And but she's hung on there. And what an interesting area of policy with One Nation is that she's started to dip her toe into the cannabis space. She's been talking about medicinal cannabis. One of the things with cannabis is it really is a working class issue. Cannabis is a working class drug, as you've alluded to. And so I've been quite surprised that Pauline and others aren't running a just say no scare campaign on the drugs issue, because I think she recognises it is a much bigger issue in the working class than in the inner city and in the leafy suburbs.
Yeah, I noticed that in our last state election result, which was a bit disappointing. There were some factors like the Libertarians ran a better candidate. Post-COVID period didn't suit us as much. But one of the things that knocked our primary vote around, I think, was you running and the Cannabis Party running. A place like Cessnock, where we expected to say get, 25% primary vote, working class, disillusioned, communities threatened by economic change and the climate change agenda, I think we got down to 16% and you guys got 12%. So I think you sort of cannibalised through cannabis part of our vote.
Oh, that's good news. You heard it here first, folks. There we go.
Yeah, well, I think that...
Stop One Nation, vote cannabis.
Well, okay, if you want to say that.
I think you just did.
But didn't you just have the same experience in Pauline's hometown of Ipswich in by-elections in Queensland? So
yep. We did very well in the by-election out there. There wasn't a huge field, but we polled.
You beat the One Nation.
We beat One
Yeah,
Nation.
there
You know, like in
Pauline Hanson's
where she
hometown.
had the chip shop.
So I think my analysis is spot on.
Yeah, we did quite well out in Werribee,
okay.
which is
What did you get there?
Oh, we got 5.5%, but there was 12 candidates.
Right.
There was 8 parties. The by-election where Labor's trying to save the seat, Liberals are trying to damage the Allen government, so they were throwing the kitchen sink at it, and we did quite well with 5.5%, which means puts us in a position we think a good position for a Senate spot at the federal election. But there was big swing against Labor. So that has scared the living shit out of Alan and Albo. I reckon they'd all be sitting up and saying, we can't, and that's where these elections are decided, aren't they?
Part of it's a protest vote, but I said in Cessnock, poor bastards, they're all losing their jobs up there, so they're on the chuff to try and cope.
Well, maybe it's a better option than, getting on the, Woodstock and Colas and, turning up to work sideways. But here we are, 2025. What's your I think you started off by saying you think Albo's in trouble.
Whatever you say about Albo, he's a survivor. And the Liberal candidate Werrell asked me, what do you think is going to happen? And all that. I said, well, you got one guarantee, mate. Albo will scrape and fight for every single last vote up to 6 o'clock on election night. So I wouldn't count him out, but boy, he's in a lot of trouble at the moment.
He is.
Cost of living stuff is really hurting him.
It really is. And it's hard to sort of point back at, people say, what have you done for me lately? When it's,
Well, it turned a lot with the voice referendum, which was obviously irrelevant to cost of living and looked like an indulgence that he got hammered. And I think at that point he might have lost his confidence in his judgment of the Australian people. One of his old mates said to me about 9 months before the voice referendum, he said to Albo, do you think this is going to play very well, mate, this voice thing? It doesn't sound like the sort of issue that's going to mobilise Labor votes. I think you might lose this referendum. And apparently he said, oh, no way in the world we're going to lose. No, the polling shows this is home and hose. This is going to bolt in. This referendum will bolt in. So he must have been bitterly disappointed that he was totally wrong in that regard.
It completely flipped. I think they was polling 70, 75%. Yeah. And by the end, it was...
Well, it was badly presented because at one point it was a harmless committee, and at the other end, they were saying it was going to solve all the problems of the world. So there was a contradiction in how it was presented. Anyway, it went down heavily, and I think at that point he lost his confidence in his judgment of the Australian people and hasn't quite recovered ever since, has he?
No, I don't think he has, and he hasn't come out and forcefully articulated for anything. Even like AUKUS, this great big spend on, and a massive pact that he's up there with, Sleepy Joe, and was it Rishi Sunak? I think he was up there.
It was Sunak.
It was Sunak.
Boris Johnson.
I think it was Sunak. But anyway, they're all up there, and the aviators signing us up. What do you reckon of AUKUS? Good deal? I mean, you've had high-level security clearance, so while we're talking about high-level, what's Pine Gap? Come on. What is it? You know what it is.
It's a listening device. It's an American listening device.
Is it?
And they share some of the intelligence with Australia. Yeah, sure. It listens in through satellites around the world. That's why Trump wants Greenland, because over the top of the planet, he can listen into the Russians.
So it's just part of Five Eyes, and we're just, tuning into what the Indonesians and the Chinese...
I've been to Pine Gap.
Have you?
With the security clearance. Yeah, I went into the control room and had a little listen myself.
Did you?
Should have got onto you, mate, and listen to what you're up to.
Oh, mate.
No, I've been to Pine Gap, and it's important to the Americans because geographically it connects with satellites they wouldn't reach if they didn't have Pine Gap. So they need it, and it's probably there to stay. Just like we listen into the Indonesians from our facilities in Darwin. So it's just the reality of global security, isn't it?
People forget that we've always had a very tense relationship with Indonesia, and at times over West Papua, Irian Jaya, like that, and we used to fly.
Bit over Timor,
a bit over Timor for sure. We had co-passers shoot a couple of our journos, and we used to fly F-111s. I think out of Catherine to Malaysia and back every now and then, just to let Jakarta know that we had that sort of capacity. AUKUS though. What do you reckon? Is it a good deal? Because one thing I'll give you as a politician is you're pretty good on the dime. You're pretty good on the pencil, and you keep an weather eye on public expenditure. You don't like public waste. You're like one person.
Well, I think the nuclear submarines are more effective for Australia than the noisy ones. These things can sit on the bottom of the ocean for weeks on end, and they've got greater distance capacity. So I would have thought they were always the better submarine investment for us, but anti-nuclear would have ruled that out. But now they're happening. We're going to have them in Sydney Harbour, these nuclear generators, out in Sydney Harbour, not
but
far
the ridiculous
from where
we are. We already have them. When the US turns up with
they're going to be ours. They're going to be ours.
They're going to be ours,
and we're going to have a nuclear technical workforce. to deal with the submarines. We're going to have some issues about disposing of the waste.
And they're going to have a nuclear capacity. In
So
truth,
I think with that happening, it's silly for Labor to be saying, well, nuclear submarines are fine, but nuclear generation of electricity is bad when it's baseload power, it's carbon free, and sure, it takes a while to introduce it. But, you know, in the UAE, they got those nuclear plants going up 6 or 7 years at pretty, decent cost. So it can be done in other parts of the world, but it's a terrible debate here. You know, Australia's a natural nuclear power because we're geologically stable. We've got the uranium in the ground. We sell it to other countries for nuclear generated electricity, but we don't do it ourselves. And they've got cheaper, more reliable electricity for manufacturing to do us in on the jobs front. So it's sort of crazy.
but we do have a situation where, like in Sydney, it takes you 15 years to build a block of flats.
Yeah, I know.
So how are you going to go building a couple gigawatt nuclear reactor
bring in
in
Sheikh
Lithgow?
Mohammed and the UAE to get it done. They got it done pronto.
Well, they
Can't bring in the Chinese. They bring in the Arabs.
I don't know what the EPA is like in the UAE, but I reckon they're a pretty soft touch.
I think they buried them in the desert.
They're pretty compliant.
They haven't been seen for a while.
Been seen. So now federal election. Dutton's got a hill to climb. He's got to win 19 seats, and you think he's a chance? I've heard a few people say that.
I think in the outer
but you look at the pendulum.
Well, you can win
There's a
19
lot in
seats.
the
You
red.
can lose 19 seats. You can win 19 seats. It depends on the electoral record. And Albanese on cost of living has been terrible. The broken promise about electricity coming down $275 a year, that was just garbage. He's got a lot to answer for, and it depends a lot on the election campaign. Campaigns still change votes. Labor's best hope will be a very negative campaign about Dutton. I think they're going to try and present him as mean and nasty.
That won't be hard.
A cost cut. Well, but I think he's handled himself pretty well as opposition leader. So,
yeah, he's got a fair bit on the
he's been
red.
around a long, long way.
He
He's
has.
a known commodity. So Labor's negative campaign will need to be pretty good. But they will throw a lot at him with negative advertising because I don't think they've got many positive things they can promote.
I thought that I thought that Labor might roll Albo and go with Chalmers. Queensland, Logan, Treasurer. Like 6 months ago. Of course, I don't think they'll do it now.
Yeah, well,
but
Albo is not like Rudd. Rudd treated the caucus like shit, and the caucus turned on him. Albo, very experienced, factional and numbers man, machine man. He waters the plants. He attends to the caucus and looks after their needs. He hasn't been arrogant to them. My mate Jenny George will say Rudd was just so rude to her, just questioning things, about her own electorate, putting her down, humiliating her. In caucus, he was a rude arsehole. Albanese, I think, has got a better touch for internal party management.
all right, there you go. Politics. Now, the important issues: sport,
I thought you were
UFC,
going to say cannabis.
cannabis.
I am supporting the Rudd idea for a referendum. The Ruddick idea for a referendum.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I think we don't do enough plebiscites to determine issues at state level. We've done some big ones like daylight saving. A plebiscite once to preserve the Legislative Council forever, basically entrench it in the Constitution. So we haven't had votes recently, but I think there's issues where the Parliament can't sort it out, can't make a decision, turn it over to the people.
Bit of direct democracy.
Direct democracy. And cannabis is an issue where there won't be a free vote. The major parties will never go for it because they think it's a bit too risky. So turn it over to the people and let them decide whether we have cannabis legalisation in New South Wales.
Well, that's how it got up in the States.
Uh-huh.
That's how it's crept in at a state level with California, or I think Colorado, California.
Uh-huh.
They just petition. The citizens can petition to actually have a
Yeah.
question put in, and every federal
Citizen initiated.
and I think it's fantastic because you see these questions put. You're voting for the governor, you're voting for the dog catcher, you're voting for the sheriff, you're voting for the governor, and you're voting whether or not to legalise cannabis or make AR-15s available for
issues
12-year-olds.
Issues have been around for a long while, and the Parliament can't make a decision. They're ripe for plebiscite, and I think cannabis is one of those.
Because what's your take on the Minns government? They've certainly got a very They've got to focus on the public, public sector. Certainly trying to be a steady hand. It's very, tightly controlled from the top. It looks like Minns and Mookie and Sharp and Jackson run a pretty tight ship. And they've
they lost one of their sailors.
They certainly lost one of their sailors, Van Halen, this week. But a bit of hubris sneaking in there. So maybe that's what they need in sort of mid-term to concentrate them. How do you think they're going?
Well, they hit the ground reviewing. They didn't have a lot of their own policies, did they? So there's been about 40 or 50 reviews of this, that and the other thing. Some of those are reported.
A few summits without recommendations and this sort of stuff.
Yeah, so not a lot of leadership and direction for the state. I suppose their one big issue has been public sector wage increases, and there it's a bit of a train wreck, isn't it? Literally, with the train rolling strikes and the nurses so discontented justifiably.
You reckon? You come on, it's just...
Well, I think when you see the teachers get a 30% pay rise and the police get 25%, the nurses who did the heavy lifting during COVID, and it's a pretty tough job, are thinking, where's our pay increase? So I think that's the issue, the demonstration effect of others getting big pay increases and others being left out. So I think that's been poorly handled for them. And now this rise of anti-Semitism, which probably no government can solve as such, because these are hatreds, thousands of years old. And the news we've had out of Bankstown Hospital is just mind-blowing.
That's outrageous.
As to how entrenched these hatreds of the Jews can be.
It's a really interesting thing, the re-emergence of anti-Semitism, because we've seen it sort of on the left, and some of the left associating themselves with some of the more radical elements of the pro-Gaza movement, like Hamas and Hezbollah and the like, waving a few flags. But on the other side of things, we've got the extreme right and, neo-Nazis turning up.
I don't think they're as big a factor. Not in Sydney anyway. I think
but in Victoria they're turning up. They poked across the border at Corowa.
They're not a Sydney phenomenon. The main Sydney graffiti and car bombing and attacks on synagogues and all that, the Sydney stuff has come from Hamas sympathisers.
There's a suggestion that someone's, paying them as crypto, that, there's foreign interference, which is totally appalling.
Well, they've got, Hamas has obviously got, when the Israeli exploded those phones and pages, it happened right across the Middle East. Hamas has got a very comprehensive network. So you'd expect that they would have agents and supporters in Australia and WhatsApp and other encrypted messaging devices. You can easily stay in contact these days, can't you? So wouldn't you expect that in Sydney, Hamas would have a couple of hundred pretty keen supporters in a network of activists doing this stuff?
Well, there certainly seems to be a lot of movement, from whenever there's a few ne'er-do-wells when they get in trouble in Western Sydney. Where do they turn up? They turn up in Lebanon or Cyprus or Syria or
people
where.
Go to these protests, so I assume there's many hundreds that are in the network.
What about nationalism? Like patriotism. Can you be a nationalist? Like, can you be a patriot without being a racist?
Yeah, I think so. There's nothing wrong with loving your country. I think it's a natural emotion. I've grown up Australian, proud of Australia, not perfect, but a great history and great achievements. So why wouldn't you love your country and be patriotic? I don't think nationalism is a dirty word, although some have tried to turn it that way. But where does that lead you? I mean, if you really don't like your country, it's a pretty good argument to go somewhere else. And if you don't like your country at that level, campaigning to change it fundamentally is also futile. So I don't get the argument that nationalism is somehow a bad word, something to be disparaged.
No, I agree. I think you should be a patriot and love your country, and
I always argue,
you don't have to hate someone.
No, but I used to call it multiple identity citizenship, that you can have different levels of citizenship, localism, nationalism, and be good global citizens as well. And I think Australia's sort of fulfilled that over the years. So it's not like citizenship needs to be one or the other. You can do all three simultaneously. It just takes a recognition that none of them are bad. It's not a bad thing to attend to your local area. I'm very community-minded. For my troubles, I've helped restore a couple of our local war memorials that fell into disrepair by raising some money and getting some people involved to fix them up. I'm quite proud of that. So, and another little thing, I started in local government. I still pitch in locally. I'm proud of my country, and I'd like to think on global issues. You know, I've got a pretty good outlook. So you can have those three things working together, can't you?
You can. I used to be a stonemason, and I worked on the Australian War Memorial in London,
right.
which is an amazing thing if you actually go and see it. Because of the design, Hyde Park Corner, it's a real position of real prominence for the British, and it's the site of Anzac Day commemorations in Britain on VE Day and Remembrance Day and all the rest. And when you go up and look at the memorial, it doesn't have the inscription of people's names. It has an inscription of where they were born, and it's the name of everyone who served.
Right.
Every unique location of everyone who served in World War I and World War II. And what you see is names like Berlin, Hong Kong,
Right.
Kandahar, you know, like just all over the world. Australia was an immigrant nation, and a lot of those people turned up and within years or a generation were fighting for their country and the rest, and fighting against Nazis. And I've always found it strange that these new young neo-Nazis, they clearly don't buy, you know, Peter Fitzsimon's books about, like, you know, Tobruk or something like that. Well, who were the Australians over there, you know, the 9th Division fighting? They were fighting the SS and Rommel and these, you know, totalitarian maniacs. I just, yeah.
I think a very small number of neo-Nazis in Australia. I've never come across them. I think at one stage we had a division of the Proud Boys. I'm not too sure you call them neo-Nazi. But, you know, a lot of this gets inflated in the media, and they don't seem to do the, you know, they march around and make a bit of noise, but they're not trying to, you know, blow the world up with caravans full of explosives or kill people in hospitals.
I know, and I think they, you know, pretty quickly get their heads kicked in.
Yeah, they do. Well, they kick each other's heads in. You know?
That's
they
exactly.
turn on each other.
They turn on
I
each
think
other.
as a rule.
Yeah, the anarchist punks and the Nazi punks down in Melbourne. Yeah, they really go at each other. Now, another area where you've stoked controversy recently, and I've got to have a crack at you here. You had a go at the first ever test century by a female at the MCG. Is it Amanda Sutherland? Is that
Annabelle?
Annabelle Sutherland. So the first 100.
Have a go.
Yes,
it was a
you
joke.
did. No,
because
it
it's
wasn't
an
a
all-male
joke.
board. It was
It's
an
an all-male board.
And they put the first female name on
Yeah.
without identifying her as female.
What does it matter?
Well, it's confusing.
Nah.
If you didn't know a lot about cricket, you're just visiting the MCG to have a look. You're in a school group. You're a school kid going through. You'd assume all those names are blokes. And they put her up there. And so my joke was maybe, you know, sort of,
No, mate. Mea
people
culpa.
need to relax a bit.
Wind back.
Well, it had laughing emojis to say, you woke people at the MCG, you got all these welcome to countries and all these woke programs. Where's your gender pronoun now? You know, to help Annabelle identify as a woman and be recognised as the first. There's nothing on that board that tells you what you just said. She's the first female centurion at the MCG in a test match. There's nothing on that board to truly recognise the achievement, is there?
Well, apart from her name,
But you need to-
and
What
if
is she,
I
AJ Sutherland? You need.
I'll Google it up. I'll Google it
but
up.
You didn't even know her first name, so you need pretty specialised cricket knowledge to know that's her.
Well, now I will know, and I think it's. I mean, what about a war memorial? Yeah. Like, do you think we should, you know, have like pronouns on war memorials?
But that's not the nature of the board because only men had ever played Test there. Only men were on the board.
Do we know that? There might have been a, there could have been
a Smoky.
Someone
stuck in.
Yeah, maybe. Put on the fake Mo in 1888.
And give them a
bet you
little
it happened.
MS descriptor too, so we know that they were female.
Yeah, okay.
Well, you could have had a separate female board, couldn't you? They do play on a very small ground. It's a different match.
Look, well, like I would back the Australian female test team versus, you know, the Australian test team, male test team, you know, in 1886. They would have all been pissed on rum, pot-bellied, bearded.
A time tunnel for that.
You'll
never know.
AI will probably work it out.
Right.
You go back, and the women would have towed the men up then, and probably will within a generation we'll probably see them. We'll see women. Why couldn't a specialist?
Serena Williams.
What about a
Serena
wicketkeeper or a
Williams,
spinner?
one of the greatest female tennis players ever, said If she played someone like Andy Murray, she'd lose 6-love in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
The male difference in strength and pace by mate.
Pace bowling. What about a spinner? What about what about you had someone who was just an amazing
female spinner King is an excellent bowler.
There
and I
you
think
go.
she would hold her own at grade level against men, I think. But once the pace bowl, the women bowl at about 115, 120. Once the 150 bowlers come on, it stumps flying everywhere. I'm sorry to tell you, they bowl them out for 50.
Well, time will tell.
30,
Now, what
10.
about UFC? You're a big fan of UFC.
I am, yeah, sure.
And
well, I'm not a fan.
I
I'm tolerant of UFC and critical of those who want to put shit on it because they don't like it. Look, I prefer boxing. A great fan of Ali and Frazier, George Foreman, that era, even Mike Tyson. So boxing is my combat sport. But for the young people who love UFC for whatever reason, what's the harm they're doing?
Oh, look, I'm not a massive fan of it. Like, I don't mind it. I did watch went to the pub down the Golden Barley and went and watched the UFC just to see what our tax. I don't think our taxpayer, I don't think we have to subsidise it.
16 million.
16 million. But
I find it the most surprising and at one level the most refreshing thing about Chris Minns. You said to me, what's the best thing he's done? I'd say UFC.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. Well, my view is...
Because it's an old Labor thing to do, isn't it, to support a working class sport?
Yeah.
Two blokes bashing and women bashing each other. And for the women, why not? They get a good income out of it. It's their choice.
Well, for some people living in Guatemala or Turkey or whatever, it's a way
out.
And if we say, oh well, I know there's some people saying it's ugly and it's the people would get hurt. But what about skydiving? What about surfing?
Yeah,
people
of
get
course.
rugby league. I mean,
bungee
come
jumping.
on. Bungee jumping. I know.
Yeah.
Or
but if you think it's ugly, don't watch it.
Yeah.
This is the easy.
Well, you don't want to get brain damage. Don't do it.
This is the easy answer to censorship. I don't know what sort of person hates something and watches it all day and then complains about it. You really should just complain about your own judgment.
Now, speaking of it, look, one last thing, sport. Rosehill. Now, you've been off the chain about Rose, but you're out there backing your group of trainers and billionaires. It's so Sydney, isn't it? It's just such inside.
Who am I backing?
Waterhouse and the people who want to keep Rosehill and all the rest of it, and it's a bit of a dick measuring competition with Blandies, isn't it? Who can muscle up the most and who's like?
Don't you reckon I'd have a bigger dick than V'landys? Come on.
I don't know, mate. They
call him Peter the Needle.
I reckon he's packing heat. He's scared.
He's packing heat.
I reckon.
I've scared him shitless.
No, I don't think so, mate. He's got a mean look about him, and he also pretty ferocious. You've taken on the government. You've taken on the ATC, the board at least at this point. Why do you hate this proposal to build 25,000 homes and build a new facility and the whole thing? Why is it just because you had misspent youth, Rosehill, Warwick Farm, Rosehill, blowing your dough on Quinellas? Is that?
Well, I think it's a beautiful racecourse. It's valuable open space. It's jobs through tourism, conferences. They have that big caravan and outdoor festival there. So I think it's a better option. The big thing in Western Sydney's always been, can we get the jobs and services in before the people arrive? Well, Rosehill development's just repeating the mistakes of the past. You've got extra population growth and you're losing jobs in that vicinity. And I think all the process has been wrong.
The jobs in Rosehill at the racetrack.
Oh, yeah.
How many people are employed there?
Oh, many hundreds.
Hundreds?
And some days thousands. Because of the jobs at the big business conferences and the caravan convention and the like they have there. And someone said this to me the other day, that stupid David Borger came to the Rosehill committee.
We'll have to bleep that out.
And said, well, he's stupid for saying this. He said, there's no jobs at Rosehill. Chris Waller has got 100 people working for him every morning, and there's other trainers there. There's probably about 500 people working at the racetrack every morning.
But can't they move to a new facility?
Well, where? At the brick pit?
Well, at the brick
pit. The brick pit's a fucking joke. You're kidding me. It's an absolute joke. You can't build it. The walls, we went out and had a look as a committee. The walls of the brick pit are collapsing with erosion. So you build the racetrack around the top, it falls into the pit. I mean, it's just ludicrous that they even considered. Then the environmental concerns about the bell frog. And,
Turn it up. You don't give a flying
Well, hang on.
about the corroboree
Well, I do
frog
that-
or
I
the
do-
bell frog.
no, it's the bell
You've done
frog.
yourself in.
No, I have.
You have.
Well, you cut me off midstream because I was going to say the bell frog and the beautifully named Latham snipe.
No.
There's a bird there, a valuable bird called the Latham snipe.
You've
So I've
made that
got
up.
to look after. No bullshit. I've got to look after my own bird.
Well,
haven't I?
the
They've
sni-
named a bird after me. So you think I've got to look after
the
it? It flies
sniping-
in from Japan. The people at the brick pit said it flies in from Japan, and the Latham snipe is so smart. It knows where to land at the brick pit, and they're going to get the shock of their life if they turn it into a racecourse.
Well, the Latham snipe.
The wetlands.
The
There's
Latham
wetlands
snipe.
there. You're from the Greens. You must support.
Hey,
wetlands.
We
used
don't
to-
talk about that.
We
don't
used
talk.
to green with all this
We've got
stuff,
we've got the shrubberies here. Do you reckon it'll get up? What will the ATC
No,
do?
it's bullshit.
It'll get
Yeah,
voted
get
down?
voted. Well, we had a vote about the directors, and the directors campaigning against the sale overwhelmingly won that election. So, and the one bloke who sat on the fence got hammered. He was the early favourite to get elected and missed out. So I'm expecting a vote at least 70% against, at least.
Oh, fair enough. Time will tell.
Well,
I know.
and it's their asset. The asset belongs to the membership, not Peter McGoran or Chris Minns, to the membership. So the membership will have their say on the 3rd of April. All I've done is provide a bit of scrutiny and information as to what's gone on. And behind the scenes, the process has been dreadful.
Fair enough, Mark. Well, look,
That's our job in the upper house, scrutinise government.
that's right. Well, you certainly still got a lot of energy for a bloke. How old are you? Like, you're 83, aren't you? How old are you? You're like, how old are you?
I'm 64 on the 28th.
Are you?
So what's that? Friday fortnight. I'm 64. I'm going okay.
You're going well.
Yeah, I'm going like a 44-year-old.
Well, you're certainly sniping away. You continue to snipe.
The Latham snipe. That's
The Latham
bird
snipe.
with the brick pit.
You're much commented on. You're much condemned. And someone said you judge someone by the quality of their enemies, mate.
Yeah,
and
Paul Keating and Jack Lang said that.
and that's
I
right.
can tell you when I go to the racetrack, overwhelmingly, and these are some of the most important and up-and-coming people in the racing industry say what you're saying about racing is spot on. Keep going. Go harder. Go harder. I mean, they're down-to-earth people. They say go harder. So, in politics, you've got to go with the encouragement you get and the feedback you get. So I'm happy with that.
Well, you're out there representing that cohort, and you've certainly been out there with some energy and conviction. I wish you all the very best.
Well, you and I entertain them over there in the upper house, except for the night you were so scared you didn't turn up on your own motion.
Which one was that?
We're going to have a stoush like Ralph and the sheepdog.
On the gas or something like that.
Yeah, and you missed your own motion.
I missed the
I had to
own-
move it for you.
Did you? And had to argue with yourself.
Yeah, I did. I'm good at that.
Well, Mark Latham, thank you very much for coming into the weeds to talk about your history,
Fantastic.
your checkered past, and your checkered past. But I really appreciate it, and all the very best with what comes next for you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Can I have a handshake, not a Howard one?
Thanks, Mark.
Happy with that?
Yeah, it was great.